Good morning and welcome everybody to this new smartEn and LCP Delta webinar, where we will be shining the spotlight on the developments of demand-side flexibility in the Central and Eastern European region. So, my name is Andrés Pinto Velo. I'm the head of research at smartEn, Smart Energy Europe. And for those of you that don't know us, smartEn is a business association based in Brussels, where we represent over 80 members that are all involved in the digitalization, decentralization, and decarbonization of the energy system, all from the perspective of the demand side, and covering the whole spectrum of the value chain. Today we have a very interesting agenda prepared for this webinar, but I wanted to touch upon briefly on why we wanted to do this spotlight for the Central and Eastern European region. Because maybe together with some other countries like Spain and Italy, Eastern Europe has been constantly the next big thing for demand-side flexibility. It is the region that has created the most expectation, let's say. It shows the biggest potential for growth as well, but it has not yet crystallized. And this is maybe the why we want to understand why that is. We want to see where the potential lies and what we can expect also in the next couple of years. It definitely is a land of opportunity. There's a lot of changes coming up in all of Europe, in particular now pushed through a new proposal by the European Commission of the electricity market design. But we are still implementing the market design of 2019. This is something that we will be touching upon in this presentation as well, the development of the regulatory framework and how it will play or what role it will play in the development of this region. For the agenda today, we have divided it in three overarching parts. First, my colleagues at LCP Delta and the co-authors of the Market Monitor for Demand-Side Flexibility that you might have seen already will be presenting this spotlight on Eastern Europe. They will introduce the results of this publication, looking really into the potential, the regulatory challenges, the opportunities that we face in different markets, and so on. Then we will move on to hearing from the actual participants in these markets from the industry side. So first, we will have Jan Novak from Nano Energies, who will bring us the aggregator's perspective of this region, how they can be active, what are the challenges. Then we will hear from Cornel Balog from Navitasoft, who will focus more on the technical aspects in the Hungarian market specifically. And then finally, we will have a Q&A session with all the panelists together. We will try to reply to as many questions from the audience as possible. And this is maybe the next point that I want to bring up, the house rules, some housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded. We will make this available online shortly after ending the webinar. And we welcome all of your questions. There's a chat function where you can send us any questions that you might have on either to the LCP and myself team or to the industry speakers. Just send the questions in the Q&A in the chat box. We'll do our best to answer them all, and otherwise we will follow up with you shortly after. Without further ado, I will pass on now to John and Lucy, who will be presenting the Market Monitor. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andres. So LCP Delta is a research consulting and data company that's been focused on the energy transition for the last 20 years. I'll be joined today by my colleague Lucy, and together with Andres, we've been working with smartEn to produce the Market Monitor to track the progress of countries developing markets and implementing the regulations to allow demand-side flexibility into flexibility markets across the whole of Europe. And when we started, the focus was very much on Northwest Europe. And that's where we've seen the most progress and the most developed markets. But over the course of the last 2 years in particular, we've really seen progress and expansion into Central and Eastern Europe. Indeed, in the last year, we've added Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Romania as countries that weren't even focused when we started producing the Market Monitor. We've seen a lot of progress in the less established countries in recent years as the markets, as the deadlines for implementing the clean energy package and for market coupling have come closer. But we're still seeing inconsistencies in implementation across Europe. We're seeing higher spend, and that's largely being driven by the energy crisis and the high gas prices, which is what's driven much of the opening of markets as TSOs attempt to bring competition to reduce costs. But we also look at what's happening at the local level and transparency. So we'll focus on regulatory progress in the next slide.
Thank you, John. So broadly speaking, looking through the lens of regulatory progress, Eastern Europe is starting to do sort of the first layer of opening. So broadly speaking, demand-side flexibility is allowed in most of the open value streams, and we're starting to see aggregation being allowed. So these are definitely positive developments that we definitely didn't see 2 or 3 years ago when we started making the market monitor maps. However, these really are just sort of the first steps in enabling demand-side flexibility participation. We still see a lot of limitations in allowing independent aggregation. So that's aggregation and demand-side flexibility from people that aren't balancing responsible parties. And that we see as a big barrier. And looking a little bit more at the details in terms of sort of independent aggregation, there are even more sort of technical barriers in terms of compensation rules. For example, in Romania, you are allowed to be an independent aggregator and participate in the markets, which is obviously a very positive thing. However, in order to do so, you need to have contractual compensation with the assets balancing responsible party. So it just goes to show that on the one hand, these markets are opening, but there are still quite a few limitations in the technicalities and allowing it sort of openness to all participants. Although I should say it's not all doom and gloom. On the one hand, there are barriers, but we're seeing pockets of very good innovation. Bulgaria, for example, is lowering their minimum bid sizes to 1 megawatt in the aims of allowing more smaller scale participation. Everything that I've also just said is all about ancillary services. I think that's a key point to mention when looking at Eastern Europe, is there are additional value streams that flexibility can access that's not what we would commonly talk about in terms of ancillary services. For example, Poland have a capacity market and a separate interruptible load program. Both of these are open to demand-side flexibility. So when looking at Eastern Europe, it's important to also look beyond the ancillary services value streams and look at the other mechanisms where demand-side flexibility can access value. Speaking of value, that leads nicely on to the next map.
And one of the questions that Lucy and I are frequently asked is, what is the size of the opportunity? What is the value of flexibility? And that's a question that can be answered in a number of ways. Typically, how much value is being accessed by demand-side flexibility is very limited. even in the more established countries, especially if we're looking at the opportunity for residential assets like EVs, heat pumps, or demand response to provide flexibility. However, with the implementation of the clean energy package, the balancing services are meant to be open to demand-side flexibility. They're meant to be open to aggregators, and they're meant to be transparent markets, replacing the opaque bilateral contracts that have historically been used by TSOs to procure the flexibility services that they need. And so we've assessed how much the TSOs are spending on the ancillary services that should be open to demand-side flexibility. And as you can see, the more populous countries, the larger countries, have a higher spend, and that spend has largely doubled across Europe over the course of the last year compared to the year before, which was almost a doubling from the previous year due to the high cost of gas, meaning that the utilization prices match the short-term wholesale price for electricity, and the opportunity cost of reserving capacity for ancillary services has also gone up. This spend is likely to ease as the gas price and subsequently electricity price falls, but there's certainly been a very large opportunity for flexibility providers to gain more revenue in the last few years than they had previously. However, there's often an inverse relationship between TSOs having a high spend on ancillary services and the accessibility of those markets to demand-side flexibility. And what we do see happening in the longer term is that the TSOs are opening markets in order to meet their obligations to reduce prices, reduce costs to consumers, because bringing demand-side flexibility into these markets does reduce the cost to everyone of managing and balancing the grid.
So the next map here looks at distribution system flexibility. And there's a similar narrative in Eastern Europe as there is with most of Europe, in the sense that distribution system flexibility is very much in its infancy. There are a few trials, a few demonstration projects sort of around Eastern Europe, and to be honest, around Europe in general. Specifically looking at Eastern Europe, the participation in distribution flexibility tends to be in large pan-European projects, and within that focused on TSO-DSO coordination. This is not a trend that, as I said, is unique to Eastern Europe, and I'm sure it will develop in the coming years, but it doesn't seem to be a priority in these markets at the moment. As the TSO value streams open, the next logical step is for the distribution systems and the lower voltage sort of increased participation. But at the moment, DSO flexibility is not a key value stream in these markets.
And it's a similar picture for the development of local energy systems. And while a number of countries have transposed both the regulations and directives on renewable energy communities and citizen energy communities into national law, we're not seeing a lot of progress beyond pilots and example projects in any of the Central and Eastern European countries. Indeed, across Europe, we're seeing the growth of energy communities largely in Spain and Italy, and very little progress in other countries. One of the challenges is that energy communities struggle to access the value in the TSO ancillary services or DSO services, where we're seeing more DSO services in Northern Europe and local energy systems in Southern Europe. And the value streams for energy communities are largely related to maximizing self-consumption over a broader area, rather than being fully integrated into the national energy system.
So finally, looking at where we see the development in the coming years. As you can see on the map here, Poland and Romania are ranked the highest in terms of future development. And that's primarily due to what John was mentioning earlier about that high TSO spend. So when these markets do open up, there's a great opportunity for demand side flexibility to access this high spend. In the next few years, so imminently, or I should say in the next year really, we are oh, apologies, that was my internet going. So we are expecting higher participation of, commercial and industrial assets to these value streams, which even though there are limitations, as I said, we can't discount the positives of that. However, there is a lot to be done in enabling wider participation of demand side flexibility, and not just pigeonholing or specifically allowing one type of asset or one type of framework. Local energy systems and distribution flexibility is less likely to develop, but as I said, that's not specific to Eastern Europe. That is a barrier facing all of Europe. What I do think is worth noting on Eastern Europe specifically is renewable generation targets. One of the key elements that goes into making these maps that you see here, or specifically the future map, is renewable generation and long-term targets for renewable generation. It's one of the key metrics in determining the need of flexibility in the market. So going forward, what's the renewables and how is that going to impact the inertia and the frequency needs? In Eastern European countries, we're seeing less of a significant growth in renewables as we are to say other countries in Europe. And this has implications for the long-term need of flexibility, or the long-term increase of flexibility, I should say. That's not to say there isn't a huge potential for demand-side flexibility in the coming years. I think we would all agree there is. It is just a point to consider going forwards if the markets become saturated with new and international players in the coming years. But I don't want to end on a slightly more negative note. As Andreas said, Eastern European is one of the next best things in terms of flexibility, and I'm very much looking forward to sort of tracking and understanding how demand side flexibility grows in these markets in the coming months and years.
So just before we move on, Lucy, we've had a question that's come in the chat. So please do keep asking questions around why local energy systems are important from a demand side flexibility point of view. And the answer to that question is that we're seeing huge growth in a lot of countries in large front of meter batteries that can provide ancillary services, that can provide stability and bouncing to the grid as a whole at the transmission level. But being transmission connected, they can't do much to resolve issues that are appearing on the local grid from the growth in electrification, both of demand side assets like electric vehicles and heat pumps, or the growth of renewable generation on the distribution grid. So demand side flexibility that's distribution connected is uniquely placed to address some of those issues. So there's a unique opportunity for demand side flexibility to get value from local systems and DSO services.
Indeed. Thanks a lot, John and Lucy, for this insightful remarks. And just to build up on what John was mentioning on local energy systems, indeed, extremely important that DSF can access those value streams as well. On top of what John was saying on the topic of being able to manage renewable generation and electrification of transport and heating, there's also the fact that for the development of demand-side flexibility services, you need to be able to access as many value streams as possible to make the business case. So just from the company's perspective, the balanced service provider perspective, value stacking is absolutely important to be able to create this business case. So just being able to access ancillary services, for example, that would be not enough in most cases to develop these businesses. So just from this other perspective, local energy markets are really a big pool of opportunity to access there as well. That on top of the system security topics that John was mentioning. But thank you very much, John and Lucy. We will move on to now the next presentation. We will have Jan Novak joining us, the Chief Product Officer from Nano Energies. He will actually bring us this aggregator's perspective in the Eastern European region, and maybe we will hear a bit about why it is so important to have access to as many value streams as possible. Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andres. Good morning, everyone. I will follow up to presentation by LCP Delta with the aggregator's view on the region, since Nano Energies is an aggregator operating currently in 5 countries in the region. Nano Energies is an international company based in Czech Republic, Prague, with history of 15 years in energy business, covering multiple value streams when you look at perspective from the customer, meaning that we have history of utilizing flexibility not only on ancillary services but also in short-term power markets. At the moment, our company is steering more than 150 megawatts of assets of our customers. Nano Energies does not operate its own assets. Looking at the Central Eastern Europe, from our experience, we see that to allow distributed flexibility to participate on ancillary services markets, there are several triggers, or you can call it barriers, and it's crucial to step by step cross those barriers to be able to allow large-scale participation of demand response and, let's say, more generally distributed flexibility to participate in energy markets. First, that I would like to mention is, say, even the existence of let's say flexible volumes on the markets. What we could see in recent past in Slovakia, there were historically many demand-side response assets or companies that were participating on ancillary services markets, but in relatively short period of time, due to high electricity prices, they were forced to close the business and also to leave the ancillary services markets. And you can see also the opportunities, not only, let's say, switch in the market. I apologize. There was a small problem with the data connection connectivity. I will follow up with the existing potential as we can see, and I will show the detail for the Czech market. There is a big potential of demand side response to participate on ancillary services markets. Other two triggers I would call legal and, let's say, market openness in terms of legal perspective. For me, the crucial trigger is allowing independent aggregation. We can see that when the market allows this, say, the participation increases quickly, and also dynamic baseline, which is a concept that historically was not used by the TSOs, and some of the TSOs are switching to dynamic baseline model that promotes demand response as well. And opening of the shorter markets, I will talk about it in the next slide. Let's say market by market. When we look at the region, you can see that the openness of the shorter markets differs relatively widely. Some of the markets are, or some of the TSOs already switched to shorter markets, and they are purchasing 100% of the volumes on shorter markets, either daily, weekly, or monthly. Czech Republic and Slovakia, and also Croatia that I put on the map as well, have at the moment relatively small participation or small volume that is purchased on short-term markets. As you can see, Czech Republic and Slovakia are on the let's say that we are still waiting for introduction of independent aggregation. If I go slightly deeper into the Czech market and looking at the potential for demand response, our company analyzed the potential with the view of 2030, and we see that from demand side perspective, there is a high potential in residential sector and also electromobility sector. You can see that the total potential is reaching up to 1.3 gigawatt of flexible power. Czech and Slovak markets are our, I would call it, home markets. So we also, as one of the first aggregators, participated on let's say improvement of legislature in order to allow introduction of aggregation and demand response as well. For the moment, Czech and Slovak TSOs both are cooperative in terms of updating regularly their TSOs codes, and the main barriers that were historically in the TSO codes itself were already removed. There is, I would say, promising development that we can see on the Czech market since dynamic baseline methodology is going to be introduced this year. And this leads me to my last slide, which focuses on, I would say, value itself on the market. We could see a very fluctuative season in the Czech market, looking at the prices of ancillary services, of so-called reservation prices. There was a high correlation historically between prices of power, let's say day-ahead prices of electricity, with the reservation prices of positive services, MFR plus and AFR plus. However, Czech regulator introduced the price cap for reservation prices that helped to say terminate or this relationship, or not terminate, but to not make it that strong. That leads or led to reduction of reservation prices on the Czech market during past months. Looking at the market, how it's going to evolve, I personally expect that the reservation prices will in short term go slightly lower, will decrease, and there is still expectation of all market participants what will happen when new intermittent resources will be connected to the grid, and what will be the effect on the ancillary services prices. So that's it from my side. Thank you for the attention.
Thanks a lot, Jan, for this interesting spotlight on the perspective of the aggregator for this region. I already see some questions coming in. Please keep sending the questions. We will try to answer them at the end of after the next presentation during the Q&A. If we don't respond to any of your questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We will try to solve them bilaterally. Now, next up, we have Cornel Balog from Navitasoft, the business development manager, who will bring us a different perspective, more on technical aspects, very much focused on one specific country, on the Hungarian market. Cornel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andres. Good morning. I'm Cornel Balog, head of business development at Navitasoft. We are an IT consulting and IT developer company. So we are not a service provider, and we do not have license activities in the energy market. However, we work for various market stakeholders. So we have been out in the market for the past 15 years, and we have been providing different core solutions for transmission system operators, both in the power and gas domain. So in some countries, we are contributing with ancillary services and market management systems for the power TSOs. But for example, in Estonia, we are developing the new data hub system. Besides system operations, we also have a product portfolio for wholesale and retail energy trading systems, which can be used also by the power plants. And you can see that we have a quite broad activity across Europe. So we have been present in 15 countries. I'm myself based in Düsseldorf in Germany. The headquarters are in Budapest, and 80% of our revenues are coming outside of Hungary. So we do not have really our, so to say, home country or base country, but we are really working across Europe and have been seeing different approaches for the same questions and different technical solutions for same questions. But as today we have the Central European focus, we thought to pick Hungary because Hungary is switched end of last year to the independent aggregator model, and I will walk through the technical aspects, how you can set up aggregation operation in Hungary. But before that, I just wanted to highlight the tool sets what we are providing. So basically, our approach is that the market entry barrier should not be on technical aspects. So we are providing different applications and interface sets to connect any type of asset towards the TSO or market spaces across Europe. and we are hoping for more standardization and easier protocols, so the costs of fully automating aggregation operation should be lower, and also if the IT can provide very good optimization tools and algorithmic trading opportunities, all market stakeholders should be able to feed these smart or artificial intelligent modules. So it's crucial that the feed-in streams, the data feed-in streams, can be automated. So this is what we are looking for. So short overview on Hungary. Basically, you see a transition map here where we had quite a lot of developments throughout last year on the TSO side, basically enabling their systems to move from producer and consumer type of approach to the mixed dispatch unit approach, which allows that the balancing service provider can be an independent, and we can have a balancing responsible party for supply and a balancing responsible party for marketing. This needed developments on the TSO side, and you can see that basically in the next 2 years there is also intention to smarten the system so far that we can talk about storage as a dispatchable unit on its own. If we look the same diagram a little bit from the different aspects, so we moved away from production and separate consumption, but still we are talking about different metering for consuming the energy to charge the battery, and different point of metering when we are discharging the battery. But now there is a possibility to have different balancing responsible parties for different directions, and the aim is to have batteries in single subunits later on. So from automation perspective, if you are connected to the TSO, then the situation is improving and making the market access easier. However, if we look at the contractual side, then we still see that how the parties agree with each other is not yet automated or not yet standardized. So on the one hand, we have improvements on data communication when we are talking with the TSO or we are exchanging data with the TSO. However, when aggregator or independent aggregator have to set up its business model between the balancing group, the supplier, and the control units, that's basically a quadrilateral agreement where the parties have to figure out the revenue streams, the risks and responsibilities, the compensation mechanisms on their own. And there is not yet a standard approach. The TSO is independent and not interfering these processes. So basically the market participants have to clarify among themselves how they would like to manage these issues. And it can be a separate contract for each of these topics independently. So in Hungary, you can obtain a, so to say, aggregator license. However, this aggregator license at this stage does not really allow you to conduct business, because if you want to do commercial activities, you would still need a trader license. An aggregator cannot have currently its own balancing group. It can be a VRP. So if you want to conclude these activities, then a trader license is also necessary. And also only BRPs can submit currently schedules. And then there are also different rules you have to take into account if you plan to aggregate consumer devices as well, and not only production units. You need to connect to different systems. And if your connected devices are on the distribution system level, then you also have to set up automated communication or some kind of communication with the DSO systems as well. And also you have to make decisions, or you have to have a clear understanding what type of reserve market products you would like to offer, or which markets you would like to market the devices what you are contracting, because each of these products will need a different interface toward the TSO system. And if you would like to provide the FFR or FCR market bits, then you also have to connect to the SCADA system. For aggregators who are coming, let's say, from abroad and entering the Hungarian market, the good news is that if they want to participate on the Hungarian exchange, then it's running on an M7 system. It means that if you already developed interfaces towards Apex or other M7 systems, then this can be also already used in the Hungarian market. And if I may, I just would like to highlight another market segment where we are active in. It's basically the Baltic countries, which are not yet synchronized with Europe, but they are planning to synchronize with the rest of Europe in 2025. It's quite market which is less discussed and probably less in focus, but the market is very keen to see significant BESS development. Basically, the regulators and the TSOs are quite worried about lack of investment in new batteries or distributed energy resources. So they will have an interim period between 25 and 30 when the TSOs are allowed to operate their own batteries in order to stabilize the grids. And probably we have not been discussing, but it's quite interesting. But the Lithuanians are experimenting because they are creating a separate battery operator, and they are investing in 4 different batteries for grid stability. But on the same time, the distribution system operator SO has been obliged to create local flexibility markets, so industrial players can also already participate in sandbox pilot projects where they are offering flexibility to the DSO, who is then in charge of settlement and also managing these capacities towards the TSO. So these markets are also having a very significant project submissions in renewable domain, in wind and solar farm implementation. So it will also increase the need for more flexibility offerings. So probably these numbers, what you can see for different markets, will be further increasing, because it's not yet clear how many projects will be realized from all of those that submitted, but we are talking about 8 gigawatt new capacity per country in the next 5 years. So it will be interesting to watch which developments, which of these projects will be realized. So that's it from my side, and we are happy to take questions and answer technical aspects.
Thanks a lot, Cornel, for this deep dive into the Hungarian market, and also this snippet on what we can expect also in the Baltics. Quite an interesting area as well, indeed, that is usually not that spoken about. But now I would like to welcome everybody to the panel, so you can all come back online, bring up your cameras. We have a couple of questions that I would be happy to share with you. I will start off already with one that was asked by Leonardo Ceni from Terna. He was asking whether this report investigated the technical requirements for different kinds of services and how they matched with the DSF capabilities. Yes, we did look into that, not only in this market monitor, but also smartEn publishes a series of publications called reports called the smartEn map. During December last year, we presented the latest version on ancillary services. We also have one on resource adequacy mechanisms, so capacity markets. In all of those reports, we do look into the technical requirements of the different products and services and how demand-side flexibility can fit into them. So the information that you cannot find in the market monitor, if you can also reach out to John and Lucy, of course, for clarifications there, or you can have a look at these other reports that are on the smartEn website and have a look into how these product designs influence DSF participation. But just a very small comment, because you also asked how they fit in these markets. And that is one of the beauties of demand-side flexibility. Through aggregation, you can have any kind of shape or form. You can shape or form the pools into whatever the system operator needs. So you could form, or you could have the shape of regular generator plant through demand-side flexibility, if that is what you needed. But moving on to maybe one question that is probably in the mind of everybody that actually joined this webinar, or that will look into this webinar later on, is where do you see the biggest opportunities showing up in the next few years, up to like 2025, 2026? What is the country to keep an eye out? Cornel already mentioned the Baltics. I don't know, Cornel, if you want to further develop on that, and or if anybody else wants to jump in, please raise your hand and let me know.
So probably I will just follow up on these. So the Baltic markets, probably in their size, they are less lucrative than, let's say, Poland and Romania, which is significantly a larger market. But in the Baltics, what we see from market discussion, that there is a lot of uncertainty who is going to invest. So on one hand, the regulators and the TSOs, they see that they will need batteries and other flexibilities, but there is a big uncertainty if investments will happen from private investors. So probably the first movers and the first risk takers will have a very good position on long run. But it's definitely not a market where a lot of participants will be able to go in. So I think size matters. That's for sure. And we are now, let's say, in Eastern Europe or Central Europe, we have a lot of focus on TSO transmission level and these markets, and probably we are talking not sufficiently on mid and low voltage needs and distribution level. So I think having in mind the large number of photovoltaic rooftop solar installments and other assets which are coming in these, going to be connected to the distribution grids is something to be watched, and I think there is probably not enough discussion and not enough modeling what is the potential on that grid level. But I think if we look at Netherlands or Germany, this will come also to Central and Eastern Europe.
Indeed, very good point, Cornel, to keep an eye on the distribution level as well. A good message for any DSO and a regulator in the room to move along with the regulatory frameworks that will facilitate this development. I don't know, John, Lucy, you had a map on, or you presented a map on the potential market size. Where do you see this developing? Or what is the next big country to come into the forefront?
If we're talking sheerly about size, it'd be amiss to not mention Poland. Yes, it's not an open market at the moment. It's quite closed actually, but it's got a huge potential. And unlike the development that we've seen maybe in more of Western and Central Europe, where access to demand side flexibility has been quite incremental, when Poland opens in the next couple of years, it's almost all or nothing. So they're going to open theoretically to demand-side flexibility, independent aggregation, low minimum bid sizes. So when it does open, there will be a greater immediate opportunity than, say, the long-term development that we've seen in other markets, which presents, I guess, an opportunity that we haven't really seen for demand-side flexibility anywhere else.
Jan, from your perspective, what is the next? You've touched upon on a few countries. Where is your company looking into, if you can say? And if not, there was actually a question also directed to you, if you want to touch upon that, asking you to introduce the dynamic baseline concept. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Andres. I will rephrase the question, not where we are, say, looking, not to disclose information that I cannot, but where I see the potential. And I personally do see high potential for demand response in Hungary, which I would say legally at the moment is very close to say allowing demand response to participate on the markets, and there would be a second perspective, and that's what I see will have an effect that will require the reaction by TSOs to open the markets to demand response, and that's the introduction of large-scale intermittent resources, PV swing. So from this perspective, I see high potential and let's say high need in Poland and in Romania. So those are the when you talk about the next best thing, I would say those are the two from my perspective. And talking about the second topic, dynamic baseline, I will briefly introduce what is it and why it's important for demand response. I would say the standard case when you are an aggregator or let's say provider of ancillary services in general, the communication between you and TSO regarding your plant diagram, which is the baseline for the provided service, was on hourly resolution, meaning that you were required to plan your baseline and to keep your baseline each hour on the same line, same baseline. This is operatively difficult, and for some technologies even impossible to keep. Even though as an aggregator you have an option to aggregate multiple assets, but still it's very complex exercise to be able to aggregate multiple demand response in real time. So introduction of dynamic baseline that allows you as an aggregator or provider of ancillary services to report your baseline on different level each second or each 4 seconds means that you may react to actual development of your consumption, actual development of your production, and to change it accordingly to say internal processes in the company or to weather forecasts. At the moment, the approach by the TSOs in the region is that they are step by step allowing dynamic baseline models. They differ country to country, and also the ancillary services market or product to product. If I would use an example of Czech Republic, the TSO is introducing the baseline, dynamic baseline, which will allow you to report baseline for each asset on different level 60 seconds prior to the moment or to real time and to change it every 4 seconds. So that's the example, but it's valid for or it's going to be valid for AFRR, not for NFRR. So that's one of the examples. My personal view is that this will really open the gate for demand response in large scale.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the importance of getting baselining and baseline methodologies right. This is one of the topics that is really currently being discussed in Brussels quite a lot. It is a topic that came up now also with the new proposal by the European Commission on the revision of the electricity market design. And this was a bit where I wanted to go with my second question. So this the regulation or regulatory aspects, we see also in the chat a couple of questions of what are the biggest regulatory barriers in Hungary. So there is a concern with regulation. It is quite clear that the potential is there. The market size is there. Demand side flexibility has the capabilities. Technically, it's not a problem, as we saw from Cornel's presentation. But regulation is still limiting us. And this new proposal by the European Commission, it has a very strong focus in enabling demand-side flexibility. They introduced this dedicated peak shaving product, which is another revenue stream or another possibility for demand response. The introduction of targets for demand-side flexibility in member states, the introduction of sub-metering, the expansion of the energy sharing concept. So there is a really strong push for regulatory change. But I wanted to ask the question to the panel. What do you foresee could be the biggest game changer for this Central and Eastern European region to really enable the development of flexibility? We already had some comments on independent aggregation, but is there something that stands out from this revision of the electricity market design, or something that you see missing that could be really a game changer? Maybe John, Lucy, if you want to comment on that.
Thank you, Andres. And I've written down some notes in front of me where I listed the new things that the proposals bring in, and I had the 4 things that you've just mentioned as the targets for flexibility, the peak shaving product, separate metering, and rules for energy sharing as being the things that are grabbing all the attention, but that I do not think are the most important things in the proposals. And what I think is probably going to have the most impact are the articles that previously were in the electricity directive that are being moved over more towards the regulations. So there are aspects that, as you mentioned right at the start, that the implementation of the 2019 package is still slow, it's inconsistent, and all the sort of the unheralded aspects of the proposal that are bringing more consistency, more standardization across different countries, aligning the timescales. I think they're the ones that are going to have the biggest impact in the short term of bringing every country, every member state up to the same point of opening the markets and allowing business models that can be implemented across countries. Aligned to that is the deadline for market coupling and making sure that the markets are open and comparable across countries. And possibly the one aspect that I would bring in as having a big impact for demand side flexibility is the proposal to bring down the minimum bid size and to align that to the sub-megawatt level. That's one area that we do see markets that are ostensibly open restrict the ability of aggregators to participate because of the large minimum bid size that's required, and bringing that down is going to bring up the opportunity for demand side flexibility.
Very important message indeed, John. Not to forget the 2019 directive and regulation. We're still implementing that. As we saw in from the presentation from Cornel and Jan, there are still things that are not that are in this 2019 legislation that are not being implemented in some of the Eastern European countries. I think this is indeed something quite important to keep an eye out. I don't know, Cornel, Jan, what is it, if you have any comment on this, what is it, what you're missing in the regulation that will let you really jump into action? Jan, you were raising a hand.
One point that I would like to stress is sub-metering. As you could see that residential flexibility has very high potential, which is totally unutilized at the moment. Sub-metering will allow new group of or new segment to participate or to join the market.
I would join. So I completely agree with Jan, sub-metering, but I would also highlight that even the current metering data access or DSO metering data access is quite difficult across the region, and probably even a broader comment that, okay, my market size matters. And even in larger markets, and especially if we are going to the smaller markets, data automation costs can be a barrier. And you have to see that aggregator business is data and algorithmic driven business. So if the independent aggregators cannot focus on their butter and bread, which is creating smart algorithms and creating smart optimization models, but they have to spend significant amount of their budget on interfaces and accessing data to feed their algorithm, then the whole market suffers. Then there are less aggregators there, and then there's less competition, less liquidity. And we have seen some smaller countries who are coming up with interface specification, which is very unique for that country. And that's also should be considered as a market entry barrier from a regulator perspective. So I think the regulators are focusing on policy and market design aspects, but the IT aspects should not be forgotten. So I think there should be more active engagement in IT specification, that the region, the TSOs, the DSOs are following standards, implementing ENTSO-E recommendations and not coming up with their own interpretations, because those add up as a market barrier, and that's increasing costs of market access.
Thank you, Cornel. Well, with this message, I think this is quite an important message that you all touched upon, the importance of getting this regulation right and implementing it as soon as possible. I think this is quite a positive message. I think that there is, we've seen today that there's quite a lot of potential in Eastern Europe. Poland came recurringly into everybody's presentation. In the chat box, I've seen a lot of questions around Hungary that we couldn't answer all today, but we will try to follow up on with you. So there is a lot of interest out there. There's a lot of potential. I'm very glad that we managed to bring a bit of the spotlight to everybody that is listening. With this, I will close the webinar. I just wanted to thank again Cornel, Jan, John, and Lucy for your insightful presentations, for joining this Q&A and giving us your perspective. I want to thank all the audience for listening and participating with the Q&A. Like we said, the presentation will be made available. You will be able to rewatch this webinar online. And if there's any question that you would like to ask us, please reach out to either of the speakers or to myself. We will be more than happy to help you out. Thanks a lot. Have a nice rest of the day and talk to you soon.
Thank you, smartEn, for the opportunity. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Andreas.
Thank you.